All right. So you want to start singing?
Sure. Let me share my screen. Host disabled attendee screen sharing. It appears I cannot share my screen.
Who's the host? Am I the host?
You are the host.
I've never been the host, so let's. Is it preferences? Edit.
You could also just make Sergey a co-host, and then he might be able to screen share.
I have also no idea how to do that. I'm not a great host.
There's a security button at the lower part of the interface if you have it. There's like a shield.
Oh yeah, cool. Allow participants to share screen. Cool.
Yeah, let me try now. Awesome. All right, can you see the slides? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, and yes.
Great. All right, so this is a report of what we tested for the release over the period of about 2 weeks or so. The team was Jay, Luke, myself, with Marius directing our efforts. So first, this is a summary of what we focused on. So first, tutorials. We worked through and tried to carefully examine each of the following tutorials. So we did the Galaxy 101 tutorials. We went through all the Galaxy UI and data manipulation tutorials. Then we semi-randomly chose 3 tutorials from the Galaxy for Scientists section. And we did the tutorial on installing Galaxy with Ansible. We paid attention to everything we could reasonably examine, noting any discrepancies. Tool tests. We examined tool test results, comparing the weekly runs of testing and linting on 2009 to runs on previous releases to check for any new failed tests or any new errors. And in addition to that, we tried out basic functionality such as logging in and logging out in different contexts, tool search, again in different contexts. We read through the release notes, we built the release for use in the Anvil platform, and we noted the improved launch time, and there were no observed negative effects. So, summary of results. I will go through this list and then I will provide specific examples for different points. So first, tutorials. The screenshots were mostly outdated, and that was expected. Outdated colors, details of UI, that included both significant and not significant discrepancies. Descriptions of the user interface in the text sometimes diverge from what is on the screen. Again, sometimes it matters, sometimes it does not. The tool search behavior changed, and in some cases it significantly affects tutorials. Again, I will give you specific examples. Some details of external resources were diverged from what was in the text. Again, in most cases that was not significant. And a few steps in the tutorials failed. Some tools were missing, some links were broken. Again, we fixed what we could. We opened issues for what we did not fix. Tool tests. There were just a few new errors and failed tests. Specifically, and data import had 2 errors. Scan by inspect had 1 error. All of them were accounted for. It was 1 bug which was fixed. The media data types were not loading correctly. Video media data types, again, that was a minor bug. Missing types listed in the sample config file. That was also taken care of. Overall, let's see. Some features didn't work as expected in minor ways. The tool search. Again, the tutorial would list a tool. It would say search for this tool. It will be close to the top. It will be at the top of the results. It was nowhere to be found, or it would be closer to the bottom of the list of results. We did encounter at least once a random logout 404 error. Unfortunately, we were not able to repeat it. More or less everything else worked as expected. And the fixes, overall, what we did was we fixed some typos, we fixed links to broken data sets, broken links to data sets. Those were links to libraries in, I believe, 2 tutorials. The old links had folders # list, and removing the # list fixed that. There were, I believe, 2 missing tools which were referred to in the tutorials. One was compose text parameter value. The other one was one of the regex tools, regex find and replace. Also, both issues fixed. So here are some examples of the inconsistencies. On the left, there are minor issues which really don't, in my opinion, don't require any intervention. On the right, they might. So minor issues, discrepancies in UI, asterisks in workflow editor no longer exists. Some checkboxes don't look or don't function the same way. In one place, it meant the tutorial mentioned although spaces are allowed in tags for histories, it is not advisable, etc., etc. In fact, that is not so. You cannot have a tag with a space. At least I tried to, and it was promptly replaced with, I believe, an underscore, or the space was removed. The 2 tags were made. Actually, I don't remember now that I think of it. Screenshots do not match the suggested input. Sometimes the colors were different. Again, this is not significant. Dataset tool help icon missing. Drop-down menu for all selected. There were 2 missing options: permanently deleted datasets and built a collection from rules. Again, this might be a simple update of a screenshot. Inconsistencies
Sorry, which screenshots are you talking about? In tutorials?
Yes, in tutorials. For all selected missing options, this is, I believe, a drop-down menu yes, this is the history options drop-down menu. It can be in any tutorial, most likely Galaxy 101, but could be any, maybe the history-related tutorial for the UI. Anyway, so there requires update. Here are just a few examples we came across. A specific step in the tutorial mentions a button. The button is renamed, like click build should be click upload, and such examples. Another tutorial, I believe it was Galaxy 101 or Galaxy 101 for everyone. There were outdated steps to create new history. So the steps were very detailed, specifically go to this menu, find this option, click that button. It, of course, can be done, but slightly differently. So it's the same menu, but a different option, maybe 2 steps instead of 1, these kind of details. And external resources. Again, an example, a quote from GeneCode website is no longer accurate, and that's understandable. I believe, again, our Galaxy 101 tutorial quotes what's listed on the GeneCode website. Well, it's not so anymore. USCS main pre-selects V32 instead of V24, these kind of details. So the following are thoughts and comments. And
before you go, Sergey, do we have any stats on most frequently accessed trainings? Is that, I don't know,
not that I know of.
I'm sure we do. It's just that we need to ask Berenice or Saskia.
So we don't exactly have that, and I guess overall, sort of, how often the tutorials accessed is probably indicative. I don't know if we have that data. The data that we definitely have is the amount of feedback that we get. So we have an issue on the training material repo, and there we can see which tutorial has the most feedbacks, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be the 101 tutorials. So the starting beginner tutorials.
I think lately it's the short introduction to Galaxy.
Yeah.
What about, do we have a Google Analytics or whatever it is enabled on that site?
I don't know.
I don't know if anyone's on the call that could tell us this,
Elena should know.
but she's not on the call, I think. Okay. Well, that's a question we should follow up on that.
Okay.
So moving on. Last slide is pure thoughts. So this is something we would like to open for discussion. These are ideas we came up with regard to how we can simplify, improve this kind of release testing for next time, as well as simplify maintenance of tutorials in particular. So first of all, release testing team, developers plus users. So here's what we're thinking. Ideally, I think it should consist of developers and users unless the developers are also users. The reason for that is developers are most capable of evaluating the system, looking for obvious technical problems like mismatched this, mismatched that button not working, steps in the tutorial not as expected. However, if I don't have a background in genomics, then my real-world context is really limited to the tutorial or tutorials. So a user who actually uses Galaxy would be helpful on the team. So this is one. I suppose I will go through the points and then we can discuss everything, unless feel free to interject at any time. Two, more structured testing plan. So again, what we experienced, and again, this is from our personal experience from this testing period, without a baseline or a more structured approach, it's really turning into a routine usability testing. It's testing for everything. So we think what would help is being able to test. First of all, being able to test the current and new release side by side. Maybe use test and main for a given period, one with the new release, one with the old release. That way we could evaluate qualitatively, not quantitatively, how well something works on the new release compared to the old release, if we could run two tutorials side by side. So that's one idea. Another idea is having a very structured list of items to check and items not to check, like a protocol. This probably will make it much easier and more efficient versus to the approach look and see. So literally ignore screenshot colors unless screenshot colors or unless details of the user interface specifically referred to in the text, that kind of stuff.
I mean, one comment I have on this one is about this being the very first time this was done. You know, the scope was pretty extensive, large, given that, you know, things were sort of out of date all over the place. But if we continue with this plan and this model, right, we're really never going to be more than 3 months out of date. So the number of screenshots and whatnot that's going to have to be updated is going to be much smaller than it is, you know, was this time, or it's going to be the next couple of these iterations. So maybe we can have a system that's actually kept in sync with the releases with not a whole lot of effort after this initial push.
If I can make an extra point after Ennis, is that the tutorials which have screenshot for the Galaxy interface are a minority, a very few of them. And I think you selected the one that have them, like the introduction one, while all the one for scientists don't have almost any screenshot on purpose, just to work around the issues that you just mentioned, that the interface change. So it's obviously good to update the screenshot, but it's only a couple of tutorials that have them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but in the same time, sort of the introductory tutorials are the most important ones because sort of that's where new users come. And I think
it's just the scale of the problem is not that big.
Yeah.
So if I may, it's right that there is a minority of tutorials with screenshots, fortunately. However, there is sort of a war of opinions here. It's not a war. It's just so for example, I really think screenshots are extremely important. However, they're unsustainable, obviously. But now, since you can generate tutorial skeletons out of workflows directly, I think we just need to redo Galaxy 101. Basically, create a workflow, get a tutorial skeleton, and just make it without any screenshots. However, in the future, this is something we're talking about. It's one of the plans eventually is to re-engineer Planemo in such a way that in addition to filling these tool form parameters, it would be nice if we can auto-generate screenshots as well. So we can just rerun it every time.
So that's a current, I just spoke with a new person out of EU who's actually currently working on that specific thing. I don't remember their name off the top of my head, but I can get that back to you. And they're also looking to add GIFs into training.
Who is that person you spoke with?
I can, yes, Oleg.
Ah, oh, from EU, I say. I thought you said IU. I was like,
No. EU.
Okay. All right, cool. That's I think that's because I talked to Bjorn about it like 2 days ago, so that's probably all. All right, okay, sorry.
Well, with regard to making the whole problem of maintaining tutorials more tractable, edit them a little bit. So, for example, do not quote text do not make them specific where it's not really important. So do not quote text from external resources, for example. And more importantly, where possible, to some extent, not describe specifics of the Galaxy UI in an imperative manner. Think more declaratively. So use the menu to enable this option versus go to the menu which is located there, pick the third option from the top and click that button. Again, where it's possible. The fourth idea is, so we came across at least 2 examples of tools which were accidentally dropped from main. Maybe it would be a good idea to somehow highlight or list the tools used in each tutorial at the top of the tutorial. This could be maybe a first step towards automating this whole process, making sure that these tools never get dropped from main by accident, or at the very least, reviewing each tutorial during release testing would be simpler if all the reference tools were listed in one place, preferably at the top.
There's something that could complete the circle here, maybe, and I think we discussed this at just kind of over beer at some point in the past, was to add an option to the history to say export a list of tools and tool versions that were used in this history. And so if we can generate tutorials from workflows, run a workflow, get a history, export that, and feed that back into the header of the tutorial, that kind of...
That's already done too, in a way,
Yes.
from workflows.
Yes. So the workflows contain all the tools. So if you upload the workflow, you can check. And I think we have some work ongoing to, I think Dave B is working on sort of making sure that we have all the tools updated all the time. And then in the next step, we should also make sure that tools included in workflows for tutorials are also on usegalaxy.org. But that should be a very small number if we keep all our trusted sources like IUC, Dev Team, Bjorn's tools, Galaxy P. If we keep those up to date, that should be a very, very small number that we need to add.
It would also be really cool if we could integrate tours and tutorials, right? So as you're going, click on the thing and you click on the thing and the thing in the Galaxy moves, right? So I think that would be really great.
So I would even put out the question, if we have tools that are actually working and are sustainable and so on, do we actually need to have figures in the tutorial?
Figures?
The screenshots.
Screenshots. If we have a really proper working tour with text from GTN included and it just plays more or less, it really guides you through the entire tutorial. Do we then really need to have static screenshots in our handwritten tutorial?
No.
So should we not invest more time, more effort in tours at some point?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
But then, if Oleg is working on generating from images, maybe we should do it.
So what Oleg is doing is more or less what John started already. So we want to have external Selenium testing. So we want to have a repository that you can say, please run these Selenium tests, these given Galaxy instances, so that we make sure that certain user interface aspects just keep working. So like we run workflow testing against different Galaxy instances.
Mm-hmm.
And one feature of that can be to have some screenshots. And I think still that a few user elements, what Nicola mentioned in the sense of the upload button and so on, these figures do make sense, I think, in a tutorial. And these we can auto-generate. But entirely tutorials, I'm not sure. I think tours are way better vehicle for that, in my opinion. And maybe we should put more effort, and maybe Oleg should work on that as the next project. I don't know, to make tours, stable, more or less. And then we can advertise them way more. I mean, there were times where we hired a student to actually have for the major tutorials tours. They are still there, they are still supposed to work, but yeah, I mean, let's face it, they are not that stable that they should be.
There's also Jeff Leake's framework for automatically generating teaching content that we're using for Anvil, and we're using for ITCR and Galaxy as well. And this would be something to potentially look at as well in terms of integrating and automating all of this content generation so that you can keep up as the interface changes.
That is already, actually, Helena did some, there's a PR on integrating that Jeff Leake's approach into a GTN, so auto-generating videos.
How far does that get us towards what we want then, would be the question.
It's a good question.
I mean, it's a little different, right? In the sense that you'd be reading the tutorial Markdown more or less, while tours give you this more interactive thing. It's sort of complementary, I would guess.
Well, what I'd like to see is the Markdown augmented in such a way that you can automatically generate the tour, or vice versa. So they don't have to stand alone, they can work together if we can figure out how to automate that.
So I think a tour, I mean, I can just speak for the tour, but the tour could be pretty much, to a large degree, automated out of a workflow. I mean, that should be the aim, sorry.
Yep, I agree.
And the same goes probably for, we can probably go from a workflow to a very large degree to the video. I guess the workflow is the entity that we should concentrate. There's everything defined from testing, and we can bootstrap a lot out of a workflow, right? And in the end, we need to add text, so explanatory text. But I hope, I mean, that's my guess that we can.
Is there any way to use text from workflow invocation reports? So you actually fill everything. So when you create a workflow, you actually do all the work already. And then so that's actually the only thing you're actually doing, and then it gets automated, and everything else is automatically generated.
I think there's definitely potential to do that. So we have these. So so you can just run the workflow, and with Sam's work, we can take that invocation, make a page out of it, and these pages are now Markdown based. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, I think we have a lot of stuff already there that would make it sort of feasible to make the tutorial directly within Galaxy. So you say, I mean, hypothetical scenarios that you do your analysis interactively, you extract the workflow, you run it, or I mean, it doesn't really matter where you generate the page from, but then from that page going to tutorial might be this nice integrated thing, right?
So I mean,
I don't know if it's smart to put more things into Galaxy. That's another concern.
Should we be starting then from histories or from the workflow? Because you need the data sets, right?
I mean, in a sense, I mean, I think we can probably start from the history because we can anyway generate the workflow from the history.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a major piece of work somebody would need to work on, but in the same time, it's feasible.
Nick, looking for any projects?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it.
Okay, well, you'll have to start thinking about this already. So.
Oh yeah, I have been.
All right, so moving on to the last one. Last one is a very minor procedural idea. As we were going through the tutorials, stuff came up, and we tried to keep track of most of it, and most of it ended up as fixed bugs or open issues, but I'm sure some of it got lost. So what I'm thinking is maybe it will make sense next time to just aggressively open issues the moment they occur, and for the team to be prepared that when we do release testing, there will be a flood of minor issues, major issues, and whoever knows how to fix them, just pick them up and fix them. Because some of that stuff we fixed ourselves. Some of that stuff we didn't because, for example, I would find an issue with the client. I don't work on the client on a regular basis. So for me to fix that one, I think, trailing comma, which is some silly part of a JavaScript code snippet buried in the client code, would take probably a day or 2 or 3 to figure out how the client works. Versus for somebody who wrote that code would take maybe 5 minutes or less. So I would say open an issue as soon as you find it, and the team be prepared that there will be 50 new issues when the release is being tested.
I mean, this is definitely something we should do more. Yeah. I mean, the point of the release testing is that we do it sufficiently in advance of the release that we also have some time to fix what you find. We're not always going to fix everything that comes up because sometimes that's just not feasible, or it would be such a big piece of work, it would just delay the release forever. But in general, the release testing team should ideally find things. If they're really minor, you can fix them, but like prioritize having a good sort of test coverage, I think would be my idea.
That could also help with tracking things that possibly reoccur on a regular basis. So
I mean, so this is we have a very extensive suite of tests, but you know, tests are tests. Once something breaks, ideally we have a test that asserts that this is not going to happen again. But you know, too much tests can also. I will not say it, but yeah. Sure.
And as somebody who's kind of just stumbled into this entire community recently, I also think that the issues help a lot with people who are searching and trying to figure out how to come up with a solution on their own. So that was the other thing from an outside perspective, that the extra issues, even when they're closed, help with that because they come up in the Google search.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, well, I think the slides are done, so I'll stop sharing.
So I think the major bug that you guys found, you didn't even mention, which is, I think Joshi found workflow execution to be a bit slow, from which we then found that we were missing a couple of indexes on the database.
I thought it was a tangent.
Yeah, it was tangent, but we would have probably found it anyway, but that's a good thing that we found it early before the release.
What about tool tests? What was the baseline I mean, like what they run every week. So was it a shift from 2005 to 2009? And was there any, how did that happen? And are containers being tested now in the,
Marius, can you help with that?
Sure. So all the tool tests run in containers. The thing is, we do use this involucro malt build process when there is no containers available, right? So it may give you the impression that we don't have all the containers. But I think at this point, we actually do have all the containers. We test in containers. We have about 3,200 tests now. We have right now 47 failing tests, something like that. That's because we're, half of those are because we're now asserting the order within which elements in a collection occur. So that's something we didn't test before, and we still have to fix some tests, but these are not major things. We also always fetch the latest image for a combination of requirements. And so it can happen that the dependency in a new container image isn't well behaving. So we have this problem, for instance, with the hi-fi tools, meme, that use OpenMPI, which now suddenly starts writing to the root directory. This is, of course, a problem. We can remove those containers because we have the previous containers, but somebody needs to dig into what's going on there. With the release upgrade, so the things that we found were, of course, when with this more stringent testing, we found these things. And the other thing is there was a data type. I think the undata tests were broken because the data type had a small change, and that small change was breaking the peak setting process. And so that made the upload of the tool test fail. So
and
overall,
scan by.
Yeah. Sorry. But it's also, so we have this ability now to test all the tools against development Galaxy release. So when we make a change where we suspect that that may break some tools, that may have some consequences on old features that we maybe haven't tested, we now do this sort of thing that we test against the IUC tools, because we know they're supposed to work, and if we break them, we really have to think hard if we want to do that.
Is this something we can run nightly? How long would that all I
We run this weekly. Matthias invested a lot of time improving them. And so now all the tool tests, all the 3,000 run in an hour and a half. And we have slash commands. So you can say slash run all tool tests. And he's adding now that you can specify the remote and the branch so that you can easily test pull requests.
Awesome.
Just to follow up, I guess November 1st, the Docker Hub thing is going more commercial, with any image older than 6 months that hasn't been pushed or pulled will be deleted. Where are our tools actually hosted? I mean, in the containers, are we on Key, or are we on Docker Hub or Combo? Or is this something that needs attention?
We're on Key. So for now we're good. But I mean, I think the malt build containers make up like 60% of all images on Key. So if they need to save some space, they're gonna cut us, I think. I mean, we have best practice, very slim containers, but we have a lot.
So Alexi and EOS are aware of that. So we have a backup of these containers at EBI. So we have more or less a private Docker hub that we don't advertise, but where we keep backups. We are setting currently up a document that's more or less for internal discussions, I mean, internally to the scientific community, how we in general should push forward to public infrastructure that we don't pay and don't maintain. I mean, that involves key Docker Hub, but also GitHub at some point. So just to make funding agencies kind of more aware that this can happen, and this is a major threat to reproducibility and so on. I mean, that's not new to us, but for other communities, it's actually new. But we are aware of this problem. We are aware since 4 years, and we keep backups of these artifacts as much as we can. Of course, this becomes expensive over time, especially because we are currently generating a lot of containers, and also a lot of containers that Galaxy is not using, that other communities are using, and so on. So I'm just want to be honest again. I mean, we are doing that, and I think we do it great for the overall bioinformatics community, but it gets expensive. I mean, Nate is mirroring all the Singularity containers. It's getting huge, and so on, and we mirror it with CVMFS, so that's multiple terabytes in every mirrored location. I just want to say I think we are good for now, but it's getting more expensive over time, obviously, and I think the community overall should push to funding agencies to make it aware that, so either we pay KeyIO and Docker Hub, which I think is okay. So I'm actually thinking about if I just pay Docker Hub, whatever, that's 200 euros a year or whatever, and just show them also, hey, we are willing to pay kind of. But if we can put that in a grant and so on, I think that's what we should do over time, right? We should start this discussion that we are relying on public infrastructure that we are not paying for, and they can always cut us. If you want to have access to this document, please let me know. I will search for it.
Okay. If there is no more questions, maybe I can quickly go over uploading workflows. Make it short. It's not that big of a story. So let me share my screen. Can you see this?
Zoomed in a bit would be better.
Yeah, it's small actually. You have to zoom on it.
Let's see. Not better?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So one thing that we have been wanting to do forever is build more of a community around workflows. So the IUC, so the Intergalactic Utility Commission, hosts all our workflows. I mean, the best practice workflows. There's some other repositories that focus on sort of a single repository that has a lot of tools. The tools get reviewed. Upon successful review, they get merged. I mean, we run tests, they get merged, and they get uploaded to the toolshed. And then admins can install the tools. Workflows are importable by users, but we don't have a good space, or like historically, we didn't have a good place where we can get workflows from, and you can publish workflows on a Galaxy instance, but that's all that there is. I mean, that is on a specific instance. So if your workflows on usegalaxy.eu, you publish it, and on .org, somebody's looking for that workflow in the published workflows list. They're not going to find that one. And transferring the workflows is not complicated, but you have to download it and then re-upload it, and have to know where all the buttons are. And generally speaking, it's also kind of difficult to have Galaxy workflows that are ready to be reused with good metadata, README, changelog, and all that stuff. So I think one project that is a little bit ahead of what we're doing is, for instance, NFCOR, which collects Nextflow pipelines. It's all not like far away from what we could do, but this is sort of, I think, where we want to go, that ultimately you can say, I want to run IWC workflows, variant calling, or RNA-seq, or ChIP-seq, or whatever. So yeah, so I think we want to start this Intergalactic Workflows Commission, sort of modeled after the IUC, where the workflow is pretty much you make your workflow, you develop your workflow, either on your public server or you use Planemo. So Planemo has this handy workflow edit command that opens up a workflow file that you have locally. You can change it to your liking if that's all good. We have some abstractions and also some help, readmes and everything to write workflow tests. So there's now a push to write workflow tests for all the Galaxy Training Network workflows. But these workflows, I mean, they support what you're doing in the tutorial, and the tutorial don't focus on the workflow. The tutorials focus on like the analysis aspect and the scientific aspect. But I mean, if you've ever seen a variant calling workflow where you have a panel of normals or something like that, that's not something you can do that manually in your tutorial, but that's not something that typically is set up in a way that you can do that in the workflow. So that's sort of the target audience of this IWC is making workflows that are really reusable, that you can take, that are small pieces that you can compose with sub workflows. So, okay, so you write your test, you add some metadata, and then you open a pull request against such a repository that collects all our workflows. Then we have continuous integration tests that run. They will produce a workflow report. And then when that's good, we merge the workflow and we will create a new repository on GitHub. So one repository per workflow, because that's kind of the model that things are moving towards too, that really one repository per piece, so that when you make a release in that repository, that release is for one specific thing. You can go explore different versions, you have a changelog and so on. These are things we can't really do with a mono repository. So a repository like IUC, where you have like, I think by now it's well over 1,000 tools. So if you create a release, that release includes everything, and that's not super useful. Yeah, and then, so the other thing is, if we have single repositories, we can register our workflows with Dockstore or with Workflowhub. So these are these servers that support the GA4GH TRS protocol, and that's also supported by Galaxy. So that's sort of the broad lines. And since we're at the developer roundtable, I wanted to show you how this is working, how I think we should be doing this. So I've created this repository under my namespace, but ultimately I think we should move that to either Galaxy project /IWC, so that repository already exists, but it doesn't have any workflows. Or we put that directly under a different namespace. So that's something we can discuss. But so this repository is here. So this would be sort of the IUC equivalent. And I mean, I don't know if I made it clear why I think we want to have like one big repository. I think contributing to one single repository is much easier than having to deal with Git submodules where you have like many different repositories in one, but then you want to update that. That's a bit complicated, and like the review is dispersed over all these different repositories. So that's sort of this approach I'm describing has the advantage of a single big repository with the versioning aspects that you get when you have small repositories. Okay, so here is the CI workflow, and I've added some new features in Planemo to do this. So if you've seen our workflow, sorry, it's super small. If you've seen our workflows in the IOC for testing tools, this is very similar. So you say what you're going to test against. This statically for now lists the workflow that we're going to test and upload. But I've added a command that will detect all the changed workflows within a pull request. So ultimately this will not be static, but whenever there's a change to a workflow, we run tests against it. okay, so this is all not that interesting. So the decision I've taken here is that I set up CVMFS from usegalaxy.org. So if you develop your workflow on usegalaxy.org or you mount usegalaxy.org CVMFS, you get all the tools, and tools will directly be available. And Galaxy loads all those tools. That takes like 20 seconds, which is pretty good compared to installing them from the toolshed, which would be an alternative. The reference data is also available. So your workflow can just refer to HG38 or MM9, MM10, and that kind of helps to keep test data size down. And we don't really have a good way to have this sort of reference data staged now. So hopefully in the future, we have ways to very efficiently install tools and get reference data in an easy way. But since we don't have that yet, that's sort of how we can kickstart these tests. And then, yeah, I mean, you just run plenty more tests with the workflow. And if that's good, you finish with a non-zero exit code. And so if that test worked successfully, you go into this deploy stage and you run this new command that I added that is plenty more workflow upload. And that workflow upload will register a new repository on GitHub and create a release. And it will use the changelog file to make a nice release there. So we have an example here. So this is the namespace I created and I think we could use. So this is the one I created via the CI. And so it has the workflow file, it has the test definition, it has the definition for Dockstore, it has the test data, and it has the changelog. And then we're creating the releases here. And so you can just refer to this zip or tar.gz file to get the workflow. And so, yeah, when that's done, you can go to Galaxy. So there's this new TRS interface. So John did that. So that's part of the 2009 release. So if you go to workflow, it's a bit slow for me because I have a lot of workflows.
Are you missing an index?
Well, we've added all the indexes in the release, but I don't think we've updated to the latest commit yet. So maybe we're still missing some additional indexes on .org. But okay, so then you go to import, you say you can use either the search form or you can enter the ID of the workflow from Dockstore. So for instance, here you type, so I've uploaded the SARS-CoV-2 workflow. So if I type SARS, it will find the workflow. So that's the repository I just created. And then you can choose to either upload from master or any of the existing release branches. And that sort of, for now, does the same thing as downloading the workflow and re-uploading it. But ultimately, this gives us a URI to reference so that when there are updates, you can fetch updates. You can reference workflows that way and keep sort of versions and releases of the workflow together. So you know what is what, and when you execute a workflow, even if it came from different sources, you know it's the same workflow. So you can have better statistics on how many times a workflow was executed, because now if you download and upload a workflow, sort of they're not linked at all. And so I think the TRS servers sort of give us that thing for free. And I mean, the other thing is that this is something where you can search workflows and that's not bound to a specific Galaxy instance, which is really cool. And I think that model could also replace the toolshed entirely. So instead of spinning out one repository per workflow, we could also spin out one repository per tool. And what Galaxy could do is, instead of looking in the toolshed for the tool, it could check GitHub for the namespace repository combination and fetch things from there. And so that's one piece less infrastructure we would have to maintain. And I think this would be much faster if you want to test a workflow, or if you want to run plenty more run on the command line and treat it like a regular pipeline script. Right? So you don't need to wait half an hour until the toolshed installation is done. Yeah. That's the idea.
I think this is great, Marius. My question is about the URIs and whether instead of URIs, we should be using either DOIs or some kind of UUI.
So Dockstore can give us DOIs, which is pretty cool, but it's bound to a version. So we do want to still be able to link different versions of the same workflow. So you said DOI. What was your other question?
Or a UUID or a GUID or something like that.
Yes, I mean, so we have UUIDs. The problem is once you claim a UUID on the server, it's taken. So I think sort of, yeah, sort of URI scheme where you can get more specific is maybe not a bad idea. So say you start with the owner, name of the workflow, and then you can add version, something like that as an identifier scheme. So that you can also, yeah, use different tool registries should we want to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, ultimately, we want to get to this point where people can cite workflows. That's the bottom line.
Exactly. I mean, for citing workflows, I think DOI is great. That's probably the way to go.
Fantastic.
Is it correct that the whole individual repo creation is done through the CI? So the author only creates the PR and then it hands off and everything.
Yeah. And I mean, Björn had some.
The individual.
Yeah. So you shouldn't. I mean, we should make that very clear that the individual repositories are sort of read-only for the general public, right, and that the CI updates them. Because Björn sort of mentioned that CondaForge is doing a similar model, but that they do spend a lot of time maintaining the individual feedstocks. And I think we want to avoid that. We want to have like the discussion on the main repo because that's much nicer for the community.
So it's sort of public, but it's basically archive immediately after it's created.
Yeah, sort of. Like you can create new versions and everything, but all changes happen through the CI, ideally. I mean, we can make exceptions if that should become necessary for a reason. We don't necessarily have to do this multi-repo to monorepo sort of thing. But I mean, in discussing with Björn, I think we thought a single repo might be better in that regard for reviewing, because you know you get a new you get a new pull request there, and you will just look at it versus managing a subscription to. I mean, now we have exactly one repo, but yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
I think it's great. I think it's the best of both worlds from BioConda and CondaForge. So I think we should at least try it and see how this is going. So it's wonderful work. Wonderful work, Marius. Thanks.
Thank you. And I mean, there's like a ton of things to do if any of the developers don't know what they want to work on. There's a lot of small projects you can carve out, sort of advertising here.
Do we have some small things for the papercuts event?
I understood that the papercuts is mostly about like small annoyances. I think this does take a bit more planning than what you could do in 24 hours, I think. But that's a good point. Like we should, when is the papercuts? It's next week, right?
Yes.
Do you want to say something about it? I don't know if everyone's aware about this.
Anton, have you prepared something?
Well, we're at the end of the meeting.
Yes, Björn, I prepared. I'm asking you.
Okay, so we have next week a papercuts event. That's a global code fest or hackathon, like you want to name it. It's kind of a new idea. So papercuts are small, annoying bugs but they are hopefully easy to fix. So you should not spend more than a few hours. I mean, not more than a day to fix them. So please pick a bug that is easy to fix. But again, it might be a very annoying bug for the user. That's why it's called paper cut, right? It's not a small, I mean, it's not a big cut that you have, but it's really annoying if you cut yourself with a paper. And the idea is to, to focus on these small annoyances, but maybe also onboard new developers to help them. I have sent a mail around to a few of you, so feel free to go over our issue tracker. Look at those.
Do we want to coordinate that maybe? Because some of the things that are labeled paper cuts will take half a year to address.
Hopefully not. Yeah, but so the idea was that everyone reads through the issue.
You might want to stop sharing, Marius.
Oh yeah, sure. That's a good idea.
So feel free to go over the issues on our Galaxy main repo, on whatever tools IUC, maybe even GTN, and label issues that you think are fitting in the category of paper cuts with the paper cut annotation. And I hope we don't need to organize it in a strict way, but yeah, if we need to organize it early next week.
We could also do that on the day of the paper cuts, go through it, and if something might be very hard.
Would be nice. It would be nice to have this list somewhere, whatever, a few hours before the event starts, so that everyone can actually look over and see what she wants to work on. Yeah, but that's the idea. So if you have some time and help us curating these issues, and then of course joining the papercut event next week, that would be super great. Otherwise, if you have questions, please ask Dan and me, Anton, Mario. So all of us should be aware of that. So yeah, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Cool. I really like that initiative. As a user, this was my biggest grievance.
Could you be more specific when it's happening next week, Bjorn?
21st, I think.
Yeah.
The 21st, but the entire day. So. What?
Wednesday.
Wednesday, yeah. So and we will have participants from Australia, from USA, or the whatever, North and South America, and Europe, and also Africa. So we hope that we actually can spend 24 hours if we are lucky. So feel free to join during your daytime and help others if they need help, or work on your own small paper cuts. So that would be very nice.
Great. So we'll stop the recording.